2, 1. And we are live. A very warm welcome from Vienna, Alza Grund to Chernivtsi, Ukraine. With me is Anatoliy Kruglashov. Hello, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation. Gruß out Chernivtsi and Bukovina.
Thank
to
you
our
so
former metropolitan city, Vienna.
Anatoly is the head of the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the Yuriy Fedkovych Chernivtsi National University. And he is also director of the Institute for European Integration and Regional Studies, which of course, not only with the name links us with the IDM, he is an old friend of our institute. We have worked together in numerous occasions. Actually, the first time we met in Chisinau at a conference. And in 2019, we have been developing future scenarios for the region together with our friend and member of the IDM International Council, Ulrich Schneckener. While we have developed these future scenarios with people and students from Germany, Moldova, and Ukraine, we have had very different outcomes, how the region and especially the Eastern Partnership would develop, but none of them has foreseen a full-scale war. Now, this exercise never is intended to predict actually the future, but it gives us a good indication that we have not foreseen that an escalation like this could happen. We have planned this IDMonSite before these terrible atrocities in Bucha had been published. We nevertheless will also have to talk about this, I guess, because it's one of the most horrific events in the younger history. I also want to talk about the history of the relationship between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, as Anatoly is a historian also by training. And there is a lot of things that we will be talking about in the next roughly 60 minutes. If you do have questions, feel free to ask them in the YouTube live chat. I will be monitoring this and I will try to bring it into the discussion. But now let's dive into it. And my first and most important question is, of course, Anatoly, how is the situation in Chernivtsi? How are you? How has been the developments in the last couple of weeks? I know that as we have been in contact before, that the city is a little bit less affected than other regions and the capital, but nevertheless, your country is at war. How is the situation? How are you?
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And thank you for our listeners and whoever who are now trying to follow up our conversation. I really appreciate this moment to speak about the situation in Ukraine, which developed after the beginning of war launched with Russia. And as another stage of war, because in effect, the war started since February 2014, but that time it was limited with some regional, if you like, dimensions, likewise annexation of Crimea, and plus the war on Donbass. So now we have a full-scale war because the battles, the skirmishes, and warfare affected north of Ukraine, south of Ukraine, and east of Ukraine, and even partly the center of Ukraine, around the Dnieper River. So far, regarding the Western Ukraine, it's a bit more safer. Yeah, I mean, in sense of whatever direct confrontations of Ukrainian military and Russian military forces, but the regions around are affected with missiles and bombing. Chernivtsi still, God forbid, for the worst case scenario, avoided such a destructive attacks but still it happened maybe because we don't have a very developed infrastructure, neither industrial nor military, and plus the city itself is placed around the border with Romania, which is a member of NATO and EU. Maybe it's additional factor why we are still more or less safe. But in the same time, only in the city, which is approximately 200,030 inhabitants, we have more than 30,000 refugees from the regions of Ukraine affected with the war. And therefore, it's quite another life in the city now than it happened to be before February 24th. So far, this is a general situation on the local and regional level, but for sure, the traumas of war are very much visible here, not because of media, but because practically every day or too often we have funerals of our soldiers, of our defenders, and not only them, but mainly them, which sacrifice their lives in order to secure Ukraine and Europe.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You've mentioned NATO, and in a discussion, especially also in the German-speaking, so to say, expert community, there is this this claim that exclusion of any future NATO membership of Ukraine would have possibly been able to prevent this war. I do not share this opinion because I think that there would have been no possibility when we see the actions coming from the Kremlin to prevent what is happening right now. But nevertheless, this urban legend is still going around. Would you like to comment on
Sure.
this situation?
I would say, first of all, there are several dimensions of that issue. I mean, from within Ukraine. First, Ukraine proclaimed initially its course towards NATO, so Euro-Atlantic integration, since 2002. That happened under President Leonid Kuchma, who decided that it will be or would be a right course for us. And this course existed up to the Bucharest summit of NATO, where we had opposition, the direct opposition from Hungary in time, still with the same leadership as it is now after the last elections. And plus we have a very unfriendly, I would say, suggestion done with two leaders of Western European countries. I mean, President Sarkozy of France and Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany, Federal Republic of Germany. Both of them, and especially I remember, this is from my memory, but remember a quote from Angela Merkel, who said, please, colleagues, don't irritate Volodya, meaning Vladimir Putin. Don't irritate Volodya with the inclusion of Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. What followed immediately after that? Russian-Georgian war, pretended to be covered in Russia as Georgian-South Ossetian war. In fact, it's not a right label. It's a very wrong and misleading name. So it was Russian-Georgian war, where first time Russia implied a military force to full extent to show up its military might and its turn from the soft power, or so to say in Russian style, smart power towards the hard power. Then this exclusion of Ukraine from NATO led from within Ukraine after the Yanukovych government, he decided and said, look, we will keep up, or we would keep up the course to European integration towards the EU, but not to NATO, under the slogan that we should be neutral, out of bloc's country, because nobody threatens us. Nobody threatens. That later appeared to be a clear Russian, I would say, masterpiece of undermining the capacity of Ukraine to be a member of NATO, and in the same time, it led towards the unilateral demilitarization of Ukraine, because when 2014 events happened, Ukrainian military forces were dismantled of armament and a very ability to defend country. So far, in conclusion, the course of Ukraine to NATO is now embodied in our constitution. So, and this course is supported despite different flexibilities of the pools data. It's supported with public opinion. And in conclusion, I would say, should we be a member of NATO? Nothing happened, neither at 2014 nor 2022. That's it.
When we continue here, so the other big foreign policy goal, also already much longer than this war has been going on, as you have mentioned, since 2014, is the integration into the European integration, the integration into the European Union. Would you see this as an alternative? Would you see that security could be guaranteed through an integration into the European Union? And maybe you can also comment on the situation that finally the European Commission president acknowledged that Ukraine is actually a potential candidate country to become member of the EU, which could have been done at the start of the Eastern Partnership back in 2009 already, actually.
Yeah, you put forward 3 questions, List, Sebastian, but all of them are bright and quite topical. First of all, Ukrainian course to European integration is highly supported with Ukrainian society. Now it climbed up to 19% of support. That's incredible and couldn't be paralleled in any European country ever eager to be as a member of the EU. Well, what is the general goals of our entrance to the EU? First of all, we are dreaming about return to the European family of nations and states for sure. Then we are going to reach such a level of standards of economical development, social standards, political democracy, stability, and so on and so forth. At the same time, since 1993, I study and teach now as a Jean-Monnet professor in European integration field. So this is my field. And I can say that for sure, as a professor, a Jean-Monnet professor, I have no misleading ideas that the EU could provide us with the hard security. It's up to now impossible. But EU is, first of all, it's a family of European nations. It's a political union ever closer, as we remember from the preamble of Maastricht Treaty. Then, now I guess so, it's my guess only, I hope that EU, under the circumstances of the direct Russian aggression and threats to other EU members, not only NATO, but EU members, has to reconsider the whole security concept. And therefore, the ideas of Macron and much earlier, Jean-Jacques Rousseau and other founders, not of European unity, but the ideal of European unity, so common European army might be finally realized. So we are not mistaken with the ideal of highest level of security, but our economical strengths, European solidarity with all questions towards it, and the general economical and to an extent political weight and importance of the EU is very, very helpful for us. And plus, I believe that despite all the shortages, all the deficiencies related to Ukrainian society, statehood, governance, and so on and so forth, Ukraine could be a valuable member to the EU.
So there was one aspect of it. I would like to continue in this direction. The discussion on this fast tracking membership, which is not possible to the existing treaties at the moment. But would you see that there is a possibility and maybe a window of opportunity where we could use this terrible situation to foster European integration and bring it back on track, not on the expense of the other potential member countries in the Western Balkans, but to finally fulfill maybe the ever closer union that you have mentioned?
Yeah, I understand that this is an unprecedented situation, and the very idea of the fast tracking is still under consideration, debates, and questions. But in the same time, for the moment being, I guess there's a real accessible step which should be done from the side of the EU, and I mean institutions, likewise European Commission, Council, European Council, and so on and so forth, plus member states. It should be for sure the decision to grant Ukraine with the status of candidate country. That it's accessible, it's not so questionable, it's a real political task for the horizon of the closest months, not years, because it should be a gesture of solidarity, support, and the principal will of EU to be a real contributor towards the resolution of, so to say, Ukrainian crisis, so to say, but in effect, the crisis of international order, international law, international security, and first and foremost in Europe. Therefore, making this fast-track decision on this stage with regard to the candidacy of Ukraine to be a candidate state to the EU not only support us, but EU support the prospect of peace and security in Europe and worldwide. This is my not guess. This is my true thought and opinion about the resolution of this situation.
As we both in our institutions are focusing also on regional cooperation, one thing that I have been thinking about is also the potential of macro-regional strategies, and here especially maybe the European Union strategy for the Danube region, where Ukraine is a member, at least with a couple of oblasts. And at the same time, I could see a danger that if we focus more on the regional level, that this could actually lead towards a fragmentation, and then in ultimately also contribute to maybe a division within the country. What would you say? Is there potential in regional cooperation, or is this something that we should pursue only once the war is finally over?
Well, as far as the NUPS strategy is concerned, the initiative that it was planned that the next meeting of the strategy should take place in Chernivtsi this May. And this is very important for us because, well, it's very important because Chernivtsi has certain flavor of being, so to say, a secret capital of Europe. It's not my invention. It's a very prominent phrase. So far, in this sense, I respect this initiative, this strategy, and I hope that this meeting will take place, despite all the circumstances we are living now in. Then, about the regional dimension, I am sure, and knowing the principle of European Union flexibility, and plus the concept of Europe of regions, Europe for regions, and so on and so forth, because I'm more or less acquainted with the principle, concept, and theories of European integration, I would say that we shouldn't juxtapose, regional dimension, national dimension, and supranational dimension. They should be taken together as a complementary towards each other. So far, from that point of view, whatever which is good for the prospect of closer cooperation, better communication, and some more fruitful results of that on the local, regional, national, and plus supranational level should be not only regarded and respected, but should be supported and promoted. So far, I don't see here a contradiction or a kind of competing forces. So regional initiatives, regional cooperation, cross-border cooperations, which I'm as a researcher deal a lot for years, cross-border cooperation is my field of my research as well. So I would like rather to regard and to respect, to consider them as a not alternative force, but rather a complementary a window of opportunity, if to quote your speech from the beginning, Sebastian.
Thank you so much. Yeah, let's. We can't ignore the bear in the room. So we have to talk about the relationship with the Russian Federation historically, but also given the recent horrific pictures that we learned from Bucha. How do you see that there is a possibility out of this at the moment? Do you see any possibilities, and also what role could the European Union play in order to foster a way out of this? Because for me, it becomes harder and harder to imagine how we could find some sort of way to reconciliation with the current administration in Moscow.
Absolutely true. First of all, Bucha massacre shows up as a danger of a genocide, now local, but still very intense and very terrible, very ugly. And this is quite unacceptable. It's not a reminder. It's even worse than Srebrenica and so on and so forth, because it is a big country with great military power. And when this kind of behavior is acceptable, or even more mastered with the leadership of the country, we can imagine how far this leadership and country could go on. That's very, very dangerous and terrific. Then we have to consider the purposes of the war in Ukraine. We have to know and to acknowledge that Ukraine is not just the goal of Russian war and military action. Ukraine is a kind of platform to be destroyed, punished, maybe even exemplarily punished for the unloyal behavior towards Kremlin, and then to be a kind of the platform for the further advancement of Russia into the heart of, at very least, Baltic states and some, at very least, Central Eastern European countries, which now are both members of the EU and NATO. It's not my whim. It's not my, just misleading assumption. Because remember that just on the eve, or in the first day of the Russian war in Ukraine, Russian foreign ministry officially announced that Sweden and Finland should be aware, should they join NATO, the consequences for them would be the same as for Ukraine. That has happened directly from the speaker of Russian foreign minister, not propagandist, not just, so to say, journalists or whatever advocates of crazy Kremlin's ideas. That's an official statement. Then later, some Russian ambassadors and other officials repeated that with the direct questions, would you consider some other countries to be a target of Russian military aggression? They say, for sure, some countries of the EU and NATO are our legitimate goals of military attacks. So far, nobody could be secure, safe, and quiet now. So we have to understand that this is a big plan. I say since 2013, and even earlier, since 2008, I start thinking about Russian concept of foreign policy as a not neo-imperial, but as a retro-imperial. And I try to show up that this is not neo-imperial. I said in discussion with Russian experts as well, by the way, 2008, it was the first discussion, by the way, it happened in the Hokkaido University, Japan. That time it was a very interesting conference on the security in Black Sea region. So Japanese foresaw something, 2008. And when one of the Russian experts, namely Sergei Markedonov, said me, Anatoly, be sure, this is a typical neo-imperial stance. I said, oh, Sergei, sorry. Russia did not reach the level of neo-imperial power. Likewise, Great Britain. Russia is, he said, what do you mean then? I mean, Russia is a retro-imperial power, as well as, in sense, you are just thinking about yourself, I mean, you Russians, as if you are living in time from Catherine the Great towards Alexander II. When Russian imperial state was at the, at the momentum of might and superpower, so to say, of that time. And you pretend to act as if you are there and the world is still there. So, and the Georgian war, Ukrainian war launched with Russia just proved these, Russian goals and steps. So far, closer to your question about the revelation or resolution of possible scenarios, it depends. Unfortunately, my guess is very, I don't say very pessimistic, but my realism, my perception of realism sustains the idea that with this regime, with this leadership, no stable, no guaranteed peace could came neither to Ukraine nor to Europe. So far, it means that experts, politicians, leaders of the Western countries have to consider that this is an existential war of values, war of different visions of the global order, and war which is not limited with the state borders of Ukraine. Therefore, we have to be ready and prepared for a long confrontation with Russia until Russia is led with Putin and his regime. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, a lot of things to go on here. The one thing that I would pick up on is I also see, as I mentioned, it's hard to imagine how to come to terms with the current Putin regime. However, it's not only it would be too simple to say it's Putin and his mafia clan who is dominating this, because the war is very much supported also by the Russian society. So a change in leadership, a change in the administration is maybe one part of the puzzle, but would not be completely change the overall situation in the neighborhood, I would guess. I know that you have also, as many Ukrainians do, personal family ties to the Russian Federation. And from this experience, you also know how the propaganda in the country works. I also don't see that at the moment, if there is so much of a difference between a propagandist and someone who is part of the Russian administration, but that's a different story. So if you talk with people in the Russian Federation and they tell you, look, these pictures are all forged, we need to be active in Ukraine because there is a genocide actually going on against the people in Donbass. How could you come to terms with this, and how can you discuss this, and how do we get out of this? How do you do that?
Well, sincerely, it's a big issue and a big question. First of all, let me share with you and our listeners, observers, with some of my personal experience. I visited Russia very many times. USSR, we were in the same state, USSR, Union State. And then later, after the breakdown of USSR, I continued to keep up my ties with Russian relatives and plus my colleagues from Moscow, St. Petersburg, and so on and so forth. But what happens there? For sure, it was in the beginning of the 90s, they were quite a pro-liberal course and pro-Western course. I mean, Boris Yeltsin and his first foreign minister, Andrei Kozyrev, they tried to be on the equal fit with the West. They announced very many good deals with the West. So it looks very friendly, the end of the Cold War era and so on and so forth. But the picture became vanishing since the, Allied force operation in Serbia, spring of 1999, where first time Boris Yeltsin announced his anger with this operation of NATO, and even threatened NATO with the Russian nuclear arsenal. Let me recall it. That was a direct public announcement of Boris, then time aged Boris Yeltsin, but it was. And later, he announced that his successor, heir, would be Vladimir Putin. And when Vladimir Putin became the president of Russia, elected president of Russia, I visited Moscow soon after his election as a president. After some deals, I mean, Second Chechnya War, very, well, discussable or maybe unquestionable issues about the attacks on the civilians in Moscow and around. These, you know, these blasting stories, very interesting stories. So, and I sat down working upon my doctoral dissertation, habilitation dissertation, in Moscow archives and libraries. And in leisure time, I looked at Russian TV. And what I found there, when I changed channels from the local Moscow regional or national channels, I discovered a very interesting picture that studios change in the faces of speakers, maybe in furniture, but not with in sense of content. The content all over was quite the same. Quite the same. That happened in the first period of Putin's presidency. Later, there were a lot of campaigns, including campaigns, anti-Western campaigns. When the European Union was associated with guys, for instance, in the eyes of Russia, that was a very harsh and very severe public propaganda campaign aimed against the sexual minorities. It happened right before the Russian annexation of Crimea and so on, when Putin and his team tested Russian society for the susceptibility of propaganda, of the lowest standards of propaganda against sexual minorities, you know, and they saw that it works. Then came time with the propaganda against Ukraine, with the idea that Ukrainian power after 2014, it is coup d'etat, it is supported and launched with Americans, all these Maidans and so on, it is forgery of the West against Russian spirit, Russian vote, and unity of Ukrainian and the Russian people. You know that right in the autumn, fall of previous year, Putin launched his article where he portrayed himself to be a Ukraine from the prospect of view that this is Ukrainians and Russians are not brotherly nations, they are the same nations. You know, it recalled me, sorry for my poor German, it recalled in my memory as a political scientist and historian, Ein Volk, ein Staat. You know, this Anschluss propaganda launched with Adolf Hitler, who explains that if Austrians and Germans are the same, so they had to live in one state. But remember that suddenly for Putin, 2014 and now, he discovered that this Anschluss doesn't work. Ukrainians are distinctly other nation, and they don't want to be neither together with the Russians, nor in one statehood with Russia. Major part of Ukrainians. Other part, Russians. Sure, no names, but still, I know many of Russians which are not, you know, susceptible towards this propaganda. But who they are mainly inhabitants of the major cities in Russia. They, as usual, are well educated. They are usually have a direct contact with the Western colleagues, partners, and so on and so forth. Major part of them are either blamed as a foreign agents in Russia. Civic society sector has been destroyed for at very least decades or even more in Russia, put under severe control. That is middle or upper middle class. Some of them escaped from Russia right now. When they saw the start of the war in Ukraine, they tried to flee out of the Russian Federation, out, because they were capable enough to understand what is going on at what it could bring about for them, themselves, and the country. So far, now we have, so to say, ostensibly very consolidated by not only authoritarian, mainly with neo-totalitarian means society, which believes into propaganda. Propaganda is awfully aggressive, total, comprehensive, all comprehensive, and this is a real challenge. This is a real challenge. When I tried since Georgian war, the beginning of 2014, to deal with my relatives and other, people in Russia about the topic, minority said, "Oh, it's very bad. It's very bad. It's so shameful. We are so sorry. We don't know how to do with our government and how to influence, because whatever opposition is immediately severely punished." But other part of the Russian society felt themselves and feel still satisfied, even proud. We are strong. We are masters, and that's all is right. And we love and we trust Putin. So far, this is a deep challenge. So, and until this propaganda made and plus reprisals, severe sanctions and punishments against oppositions in Russia are in action so far to break down that forcefully created unity around the regime. This is a very challenging task. But on the other hand, speaking not from the political momentum perspective, but from historical perspective, if to look into the depths of Russia, Russia is no way united society. It is society with a lot of cleavages, political, ideological, religious and confessional, ethnical. In Russia, there are some fireplaces for further challenges for Russian regime and even the statehood. So far, we should understand that this kind of consolidation has certain and clear limits, and they are rooted not only in propaganda and in the police state tools, but they are rooted in the corruption of Russian society and local and regional elite. Should the source of corruption, should the picture of the propaganda would be changing due to the pressure of sanctions, war, and so on, and hardships, I'm sure that sooner or later, I hope that sooner than later, the regime would face with the profound changes and challenges. And in this case, we will see another turns in Russian history.
Okay, thank you. So a few things to pick up here as well. In an interview with a German newspaper, you mentioned that all the masks came off from the Russian soft power. So to say, we would have to also take the masks off to show it to the Russian society that there is a possibility for change. Is that what you would be advocating for? And if yes, how can we actually do this when, as you mentioned, we have a 24/7 TV program that is perpetuating the official lines of the Kremlin. The vast majority, I think still 70 to 80% of the information that the Russian society gets comes from watching TV. How can we contribute to taking these masks off? Because yes, it is necessary to have these sanctions, but if the sanctions are always also hitting the general population and they are experiencing hardship, wouldn't that have this rally around the flag effect rather than taking the mask off the Russian regime?
Well, it's a very good and bright question, and there are no easier answering to it. No way, because first of all, the very problem is now, look, Facebook, Instagram, and some others are banned in Russia. Oppositional media like Dozhd, Rain, and Meduza and so are banned or closed in Russia. the leadership of Russian opposition weak. Likewise, a very honorable and authoritative, I mean, in repute, man Boris Nemtsov is killed by the direct order. We have to know who, yeah, whose order, and other like Navalny is detained. So far, we have that the regime made all possible to have unquestionable power above the country and society. Moreover, this is another danger. Let me say now not about the sanctions, but about the channels of communications with Russian society. Because of these measures implied with the Russian state towards the breaking down, cutting off these channels of communications. Plus, look, there are a lot of students from Russia which are now in Western European universities, I mean, the EU universities, which are now expelled gradually. All the cooperation with Russian universities is, cancelled for various reasons, but quite real. And remain a question, how can we communicate with Russian society? And this is a real problem. This is a real problem because cases with North Korea or even China, where the internet is under severe control, where the alternative information is either awfully restricted or totally forbidden. So it could be a case of Russia soon, very soon, because all the logic aims at that situation. So this is a question. This is a question. Let me say that I don't have any clear and instant receipt for now. I don't have. But in my childhood, let me recall, in time of the Cold War, being a pupil in the school and being a student under the Soviet Union, propaganda, permanent pressure, educational system which was totally controlling our mind, brains, thoughts, and so on and so forth, nothing to say about behavior. I had in my peers, we had a very interesting habit. Daytime, we were in schools and classes, different political informations and other interesting tools of Russian, then Soviet Union everyday life. But in the evening, we listened to Voice of America, Free Europe, and so on and so forth. We listened and we compared. It was very dangerous to talk about that loudly outside of the very closest, family ties or even there. But still, we tended to get some alternative informations. And it worked finally. It worked because when we balanced what we saw and listened in our country and what we got from the other sources, we saw that contradiction is quite obvious, especially after the Afghan war. So that was a great turn in our public mood. So far, I think that Russian aggressive propaganda have to see a real counter, action, reply from the democratic Western countries. And in the same time, we have to see where the weak points, loopholes of the system are, and to carefully act in order to organize the channels of alternative informations, alternative vision of the world at present, in the past, and in the future. It's not an instant resolution, but it works and it will work very effectively. Should we recognize the possibility and importance of doing this way?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I guess, I mean, if there would be answers how this is possible, we would be in a different situation and would be working towards informing here, but you made some very, very valid points. I have been sent one question already. I encourage also the others to use the several channels if they do have questions. But before we go to this, I just have one more follow-up. As you mentioned, this idea of a broader Russian Ruski Mir that is sort of denying other people's the right of existence because they're all one Russian people. We have another situation. And I was looking when I did the last moderation of these IDMonSite. We've done a couple more, but the last time I have moderated it was actually in September 2020 with a friend of ours in Minsk during the protests. Now the situation with Belarus is also that here the merging of the two countries is getting more and more forward, and we've seen also that some of the attacks are launched at the same time from Belarusian soil. At the same time, there seem to be some sabotage acts to prevent a further supply of the Russian army entering towards in the direction of Kiev. So would you say that Belarus is one part of this puzzle that you described of Putin's retro imperialism, and how is it possible to deal with this additional challenge of Lukashenko and this torn in between societies here?
Well, it's a very good question. Unfortunately, not a very pleasant, but a legitimate question about the Belarus. In effect, from many aspects, we have to state that Belarus now is controlled and annexed with Russia. And Lukashenko has a very limited power upon the country, and he is the closest ally of Putin, personally even. Nothing to say about the state policy, I mean personally. You see that these Tashkent Pact countries, as usually, withstand or oppose support towards the Putin policy. Look at Kazakhstan, look at the official position of Armenia. Well, nothing to say about the Kyrgyzstan, yeah, and so on. But nonetheless, so Putin tried to consolidate these states in order to press home Ukraine, but he didn't succeed with that. But Belarus is with Platsdarm for attacking Ukraine. Fortunately enough, Lukashenko knows perfectly well that Belarusian society is not as Russian affected with the anti-Ukrainian sentiments. Belarusians do not think that Ukrainians are their enemy, quite opposite. And Belarusians do not understand, even soldiers and officers. I don't say about generals, it's another stories, but soldiers and officers are not accepting the idea of making war with Ukraine. And therefore we have there the real sabotage, as you mentioned, against any intervention of Belarus into Russian-Ukrainian war. So from that point of view, Belarus is on the one hand the closest ally of Russia as a state, but as a nation and society, it's not provable ally for Putin. That's the situation looks like. Moreover, knowing some public moods inside the Belarusian society, now that's not to say Belarusians who immigrated from the country after 2020. So I know from many sources that Belarusians do not want to be a part of this war at all. And Lukashenko is perfectly well aware of that. In brief, about the situation in Belarus.
Thank you. So one of the questions that I have been sent, which is also a question that I see a lot going around, relates to the fact that this famous saying that the truth is the first thing that dies in a war, and how can we actually make sure and verify that information from Ukraine is not also going into propaganda in the same direction as it is with the Russian Federation. I guess that one of the things that how we are trying to do this is exactly these kind of formats that we speak to each other and talk about the situation. But nevertheless, maybe you could use the remaining time that we have also to tackle this question. How can we make sure that this is not staged and Ukrainian propaganda, what we're doing here?
I would say that for sure, Ukraine now is a country which defends itself. Ukraine has to concentrate all the resources to survive and to withstand Russian military propaganda pressure. For sure, this is a military actions where the truth is hardly comprehensive. We don't know quite clear. It's not just statistical matters. How many Russians are killed, how many of them are wounded, and so on and so forth. From this point of view, all this data, which, for instance, Ministry of Defense share, could be questioned in some figures. But the general trend is absolutely true that the main goals of the war from the beginning are not reached with the Russian Federation. The siege and destroyment of Ukrainian military forces, the siege of the capital cities, likewise Kharkiv, Kyiv, Dnipro, and so on, fail. Mariupol tries to keep it, which is very hard. For sure, we lost some territories, and unfortunately, all the Azov Sea coast so far. But we couldn't compare data from the country which defends itself and data from the country which is offender, and which all the time lies, all the time. Remember that this was about the Mariupol attacks, when Lavrov recognized that that attack took place, but he said this is because of their Nazis. What kind of Nazis? So the very problem with Russian propaganda is that this comprehensive, permanent lies. This is the case. We could address Ukrainian data with certain inaccuracy, incomprehensiveness, but in the same time, it's not a propaganda as it is. So we shouldn't compare some mistakes, some tendencies maybe which are not right and correct in time of war with the well-prepared, centralized, and absolutely ugly propaganda launched with Russian media, and even more, not only media, with Russian leading politicians. So it's not comparable in effect. But for sure, I do agree with you that in time of war, truth is the first victim of the war. That's true. But it doesn't equalize Ukrainian sources of media and Russian. And moreover, outside of the some forbidden information, likewise the results of Russian missiles and other attacks, because of military reasons, Ukraine is opened to the international media. Me personally cooperated with Western journalists, as you mentioned. Last time I made an interview with the correspondent of Frankfurter Allgemeine, for instance. So this is open. But could you ask Russian, whoever, and to get from him, her clear, sincere answers? I guess hardly.
Not on the
because
record.
In Russia, for instance, it is forbidden even to explore, to apply the word war instead of the special military attack operation.
No, absolutely. I mean, I try to keep in contact with my colleagues and friends in the Russian Federation, and there are still ways to openly communicate, but you will not get this on record. That is impossible, of course. Yes. One last thing that is also something that has been very much discussed in Austria is neutrality. You've mentioned this also in the beginning when we were talking about the historical.
Hello.
Are you still there?
I'm here, but a connection was abrupted a bit. Sebastian.
Okay. So I don't know how much you heard. Anyway, the question in Austria is often towards in the direction of neutrality. You mentioned this in the beginning when you described how we arrived in this situation. But is there so on the one hand side, is there a possibility to stay neutral at the moment? Should we stay neutral? And the second part is neutrality a way out of of this war?
I'm not sure neutrality is the right option. If you speak about Austria, Austria was in a position of neutrality for decades after the Second World War, but it was just well, the option without option for Austria. Yeah, the same is true that Finland, you know, and for instance Sweden opted up for neutrality, which especially for Finland, more for Sweden, with much more historical roots. But now they consider to quit with this neutrality, to quit for obvious reasons. And finally, about Ukraine. So this is a very problem for Ukraine to be neutral until Russia as this kind of Russia for now, aggressive, literally imperial, and in many
I think we unfortunately lost the connection for the moment. I hope it's going to come back. Let's see. You're still muted though. Can you unmute yourself?
Sebastian,
Yes.
it was abrupted. Do you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you again. Retro imperial.
We have a very low internet communication connection in the end. Do you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Maybe we are already jammed now when we come to the final conclusions. Maybe you can turn off the camera and we can still then hear you. The last thing that was possible was retro imperialism. I think we've lost him again, which is really unfortunate because I think that would have been a perfect summing up of this IDMonSite. But we have had the possibility to talk for an hour now already. The microphone still, Anatoly, the microphone is still muted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now it's works.
Okay. And you're frozen.
For a moment, but a very low connection still. Okay,
Yeah.
Sebastian.
Summing up, retro imperialism. That was the last thing that we heard from you.
Yeah, I mean, the last question of I tried to cover your question that neutrality is hardly a good option.
Yeah.
Neither for Austria, nor for Finland, Sweden, and Ukraine.
Yeah.
Otherwise, just in the case of Ukraine, to stay, so to say, neutral, it means to be just defenseless against new attacks of Russia, even if this war will be ended up with the so-called peace treaty, or rather the armistice. So far, we have to be aware that until Russian leadership and Russian society is like they are, so far, neutrality is hardly a good option.
Thank you very much. I think that is a very good last sentence for this IDMonSite. We will continue the discussion and we will definitely come back virtually and hopefully very soon also personally to Chernivtsi. Thank you so much. I think we learned a lot already, very valuable insights. Please stay safe. All the best. And also, of course, all the best for your family and friends. Thank you for taking the time and joining us to our IDMonSite.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your very bright and clever questions. Really, the situation is out of the, so to say, traditional order, and we have to look for and find out a very bright resolution of this ugly, brutal, unprecedented war. to end up with such kind of international relations in the Central Eastern Europe, Europe at all, and worldwide, hopefully.
Thank you very much to all the viewers as well. This was the IDMonSite from Ukraine, Chernivtsi. Thank you for your interest. And this will be, of course, also available afterwards on our YouTube channel, and we will put it on the Ukraine dossier that we have compiled at our website, www.idm.at. Thank you very much, and see you very, very soon.
Bye-bye. All the best.